My sister seduced my boyfriend, and my own mother helped her. She told him, "She's the ambitious one, you need a winner." I was shattered and left town to rebuild my life. Years later, at a gala I hosted, they showed up and froze when they saw who my husband was. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know how they say love is built brick by brick? For 3 years, Dean and I were building a cathedral. At least, I thought we were. He was my person. The kind of man who'd bring me a cup of coffee in the morning exactly how I liked it, a splash of cream, no sugar, without me having to ask. The kind of man who'd sit patiently for hours while I tried to explain the subtle differences between cerulean and cobalt blue for a painting I was working on, even though I knew he couldn't see it. He'd just nod and say, "I see it when you talk about it, Meredith." Our life was a collection of comfortable, beautiful moments. I remember one Saturday we spent the entire day trying to assemble a ridiculously complicated bookshelf from IKEA. We were both terrible at it. The instructions looked like ancient hieroglyphics. We put shelves in backwards, used the wrong screws, and at one point, the whole thing collapsed in a heap of particle board and frustration. We just looked at the mess, then at each other, and burst out laughing until tears streamed down our faces. Later that night, sitting on the floor eating pizza amidst the debris, he took my hand and said, "As long as I'm building it with you, I don't care if it ever stands up." That was us. We were a team. But even in the brightest sunshine, there was always a small, persistent shadow. That shadow was cast by my mother, Lorraine, and my younger sister, Sylvia. From the day Sylvia was born, it was like a light switched on in my mother's eyes that never shone quite as brightly for me. Sylvia was everything my mother valued, sharp, pragmatic, and ruthlessly ambitious. She'd gone to law school, landed a job at a prestigious firm, and was already talking about making partner before she was 30. She wore her ambition like a designer suit. I, on the other hand, was the artist. The dreamer. My mother tolerated my passion for painting the way one tolerates a child's imaginary friend, with a tight, polite smile and a complete lack of genuine interest. At family gatherings, the conversation always revolved around Sylvia's latest high-profile case or a promotion she was gunning for. When someone would ask about me, my mother would jump in before I could answer. "Oh, Meredith is still doing her art," she'd say, her tone making it sound like I was playing with finger paints in the basement. "It's so nice she has a little hobby to keep her busy." The words were always coated in sweetness, but the subtext was poison. "You are not serious. You are a disappointment." The night our cathedral came crashing down was at my cousin's graduation party. It was a warm June evening, the air filled with the scent of honeysuckle and charcoal from the grill. Dean had gone inside to grab us another round of beers. He was gone for a while, maybe 10 minutes, then 15. A little worm of unease started to squirm in my gut. I excused myself from a conversation about interest rates and went to find him. As I neared the kitchen, I heard my mother's voice, her tone low and persuasive, the one she used when she was closing a deal. I instinctively flattened myself against the wall in the dimly lit hallway, just out of sight of the swinging kitchen door. "She's the ambitious one, Dean," Lorraine was saying. "You need a winner. You have so much potential, a great career in finance ahead of you, and you deserve a partner who will be an asset, not just a decoration." I held my breath, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "Meredith is a sweet girl, of course," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "But let's be honest with each other. This art thing is a phase. It's not a career. Sylvia just made junior partner at her law firm. She understands your world. She can help you, connect you with the right people. You too, you have a spark. I've seen it." I risked a peek through the crack in the door. My world tilted on its axis. Dean was leaning against the counter, a beer in each hand, our beers. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't defending me. He was just listening, his brow furrowed. And as my mother spoke, his expression shifted from uncomfortable surprise to a look of deep, serious contemplation. He was actually considering it. He was weighing my worth against my sister's and finding me lacking. My mother placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. Think about your future, Dean. The right wife can make or break a man's career. You need a partner who can stand beside you at a corporate dinner, not one who's going to be in a paint-splattered studio. He didn't pull away. He just gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. That tiny movement was a gunshot to my heart. I stumbled back from the door, my body cold and numb. I somehow navigated my way back to the party, a fake smile plastered on my face, while inside, the foundations of my life were turning to dust. When you've been bitten by a snake, sometimes you don't realize it's venomous until the poison starts to work its way through your system. Looking back, Sylvia had been injecting small doses of poison into my life for years. I had just mistaken the symptoms for simple sibling rivalry. The incidents were so cleverly disguised as accidents or thoughtlessness that I always ended up feeling like the bad guy for being upset. I remember my 21st birthday. My friends had thrown me a surprise party. I was wearing a new dress I had saved up for, a beautiful floral sundress that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, truly pretty. Sylvia arrived late. She was wearing the exact same dress. "Oh my God, Meredith," she'd exclaimed, her hands flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I am so sorry. I saw it in a boutique last week and just fell in love with it." "What are the chances?" My friend stared, the celebratory mood instantly soured. She spent the rest of the night making a big show of it, telling everyone how awful she felt, how she'd ruined my birthday. People ended up consoling her. I just stood there, feeling like a pale imitation in my own dress, at my own party. My mother later told me I should be flattered that my sister admired my taste so much. When Dean came into the picture, her tactics became more refined. She never openly flirted with him in front of me. It was always more subtle, more insidious. At family dinners, she would sit next to him and angle her body towards his, creating a little bubble of intimacy that excluded me. She'd ask him about his work, using all the right financial jargon she'd clearly looked up beforehand. "So, Dean, what are your thoughts on the volatility in the commodities market? Do you think it's a bubble?" she'd ask, making my own contributions to the conversation, a funny story about my cat, a new painting I was excited about, seem utterly frivolous. I'll never forget one particular Thanksgiving. We were all in the living room after dinner, stuffed and sleepy. I was curled up on the armchair, and Dean was on the sofa. Sylvia came over and squeezed herself into the small space right next to him, her thigh pressed firmly against his. "I'm so cold," she'd announced to no one in particular, before turning to him. "Dean, you're like a furnace. Mind if I borrow some of your heat?" She'd laughed, a light, tinkling sound, and he'd laughed with her, a little uncomfortably. I felt a spike of pure rage, but what could I say? She was just cold. I was just being sensitive. My mother, from her perch across the room, gave Sylvia a small, approving nod. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each incident on its own was small enough to be explained away. But taken together, they formed a clear, undeniable pattern. It was a calculated campaign to position Sylvia as the superior choice, the intellectual equal, the more exciting partner. And my mother wasn't just a bystander, she was the general, directing the attacks from the sidelines, always ready to gaslight me into believing the wounds were all in my head. The conversation in the kitchen wasn't an anomaly, it was the culmination of their years-long strategy. In the weeks that followed the party, I lived in a state of suspended disbelief. A part of me was screaming, telling me to run, to confront them, to end it. But another, more cowardly part, clung to the hope that I had imagined it all, that Dean's love for me was stronger than my mother's manipulative words. So I stayed silent, and I watched. And what I saw broke my heart all over again, piece by painful piece. It started with his phone. It used to be that he'd leave it lying around, face up, without a care in the world. Now, it was always in his pocket or placed face down on the table. He started working late more often. Our Tuesday night dinner dates, a tradition since we first started dating, were the first casualty. The first time he canceled, he called, full of apologies. "Babe, I am so sorry, my boss just dropped a huge project on my desk. I'll make it up to you, I promise." The second time, it was a text. The third time, another text, sent just an hour before we were supposed to meet. He began to sprinkle Sylvia's name into our conversations with a casualness that felt rehearsed. Sylvia was telling me about this great new steakhouse downtown. "We should try it," he'd say, completely oblivious to the fact that he was suggesting a place his new confidant had recommended. He started using phrases she used, adopting her cynical sense of humor. He was changing, morphing into a person I didn't recognize, a person molded by her influence. The breaking point for my denial came one rainy Saturday afternoon. I was supposed to be out with Jillian, but our plans got cancelled. I decided to surprise Dean at his apartment with a pizza and a movie. I let myself in with my key, calling his name. No answer. I figured he was in the shower. I put the pizza on the counter and walked towards the bedroom. That's when I saw his laptop open on the small desk in his living room. A chat window was open. It was a conversation between him and Sylvia. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I scrolled up. It was more than just lunch plans. They were talking every day, all day. He was complaining to her about his boss, something he used to only do with me. She was giving him career advice. They were sharing inside jokes. And then I saw it. A message from Dean, sent the previous Tuesday night, the third time he had cancelled on me. "Dean, God, I feel so guilty for bailing on Meredith again. Asterisk Sylvia, don't be. You're making an investment in your future. That's what you need to focus on. Besides, our strategy sessions are much more productive, don't you think? Winky face, asterisk. Dean, definitely. Thanks for understanding. You just get it. You just get it." The words swam before my eyes. He wasn't just having lunch with my sister. He was building a life with her, a life of ambition and strategy, and I wasn't a part of it. I was the obstacle. That night, when he came home, I confronted him. I was surprisingly calm. I felt like a surgeon performing a delicate, painful operation. "I saw your messages with Sylvia," I said, my voice flat. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked cornered and angry. "You went through my private computer? What the hell is wrong with you, Meredith?" "What's wrong with me?" I asked, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my throat. "You're having a secret emotional affair with my sister, orchestrated by my mother, and you're asking what's wrong with me?" "It's not an affair," he yelled, his face turning red. "It's a friendship. I'm allowed to have friends. You're being paranoid and controlling. My God, this is why I can't talk to you about my career. You don't understand it. Sylvia does. It's just two people talking about work." He was so loud, so full of righteous indignation, that he made me feel small and crazy. He was the master of gaslighting, and I was his star pupil. He left the apartment, slamming the door behind him, leaving me alone with the shattered pieces of my trust and my sanity. I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor in the dark, wondering how the man I loved had become a stranger. For a few weeks after that fight, we existed in a fragile, unspoken truce. We were polite, distant. We were two people playing house, going through the motions of a relationship that was already dead. The love and laughter were gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I knew it was over, but I didn't know how to be the one to end it. I think I was waiting for a sign, for one final, undeniable piece of evidence that would force my hand. I got it on a Friday night in late September. It was our anniversary, our 3-year anniversary. Dean had, surprisingly, made a reservation at our favorite Italian restaurant. A part of me, a naive, hopeful part, thought maybe this was his way of trying to fix things. I bought a new dress, did my hair, and tried to feel optimistic. He canceled an hour before we were supposed to leave. A text message. So sorry, something came up at work. Rain check? I just stared at the phone. Something came up. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the something was Sylvia. I called Jillian, my voice trembling. I have to know for sure, I told her. I have to see it with my own eyes. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just said, okay. I'll drive. We drove to his apartment. I felt strangely calm, like an out-of-body observer watching a tragedy unfold. I still had my key. I hesitated at the door, my hand shaking. Jillian put her hand on my shoulder. You can do this, she whispered. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was quiet. But a light was on in the bedroom. And then I saw them. A trail of clothes leading down the hallway. His tie. Her silk blouse. His belt. Her skirt. Each item was a breadcrumb leading to the scene of the crime. I walked to the bedroom doorway and stopped. I didn't need to go any further. The door was open enough. They were in his bed. His sheets. There was no mistaking the long, dark hair spread across his pillow, or the sound of her low, satisfied laugh. The sound that came out of my throat was small and broken. It was barely a whisper, but it was enough. They both froze and looked towards the door. Dean's eyes went wide with a kind of primal terror. He looked like a cornered animal. Meredith. He stammered, fumbling with the sheets. But Sylvia. Sylvia was a different story. There was no panic in her eyes. No shame. Just a flash of irritation, quickly replaced by a look of cold, calculated triumph. She sat up slowly, the sheet pooling around her waist, and looked right at me. Well, she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. I guess the secret's out. It's probably for the best. We were getting tired of hiding it. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a passionate, regrettable lapse in judgment. This was a victory lap. I looked from her smug face to Dean's pathetic, terrified one. He couldn't even look at me. He just stared at a spot on the wall, a coward until the very end. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I just turned around, walked out of the apartment, and closed the door very quietly behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the sound of the end of my life as I knew it. Jillian was waiting for me in the hallway. She just wrapped her arms around me as I started to shake uncontrollably, the shock finally giving way to a pain so immense I thought it might actually kill me. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house. I moved like a zombie, fueled by a cold, clear rage that had finally burned through the fog of my grief. I found her in her perfectly manicured garden, snipping roses, a picture of suburban tranquility. Meredith, what on earth are you doing here so early? She asked, a slight frown creasing her brow as she took in my disheveled appearance. I hadn't slept. My eyes were red and swollen. I went to Dean's apartment last night, I said, my voice flat and dead. I saw them. Together. She put down her gardening shears and sighed, a long, theatrical sound of impatience. Oh, for heaven's sake, Meredith. Must you be so dramatic? I was hoping they would tell you in a more civilized manner. You knew? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. You knew they were sleeping together? Of course, I knew, she said, brushing a speck of dirt off her pristine white pants. I encouraged it. Dean is a good match for Sylvia. He's stable, he has a good career. He's what she deserves. Someone had to make the practical decision here, since you were all so caught up in your emotions. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. I was in love with him. He was my life. How could you, my own mother, do this to me? She finally looked at me, and her eyes were as hard and cold as river stones. Because it was for your own good, she said, her voice sharp. This is the best thing that could have happened to you. Dean was a crutch. You were content to be his sweet little artist girlfriend forever. Now, you have no choice but to stand on your own 2 feet. Maybe you'll finally get a real job, build a real life. One day, you might even thank me. She truly believed it. She believed she had done me a favor by orchestrating the complete and utter destruction of my heart. In her twisted worldview, my pain was a necessary sacrifice for my potential improvement. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The part of me that had always craved her approval, that had spent a lifetime trying to be good enough for her, simply withered and died. I will never thank you, I said, my voice low and shaking with an intensity that made her take a step back. You haven't made me stronger. You've just shown me who you really are. And you, I looked her straight in the eye, are a monster. I turned and walked away without looking back. I went home and started packing. It was a methodical, emotionless process. I moved through my apartment, a ghost in the ruins of my own life. I packed my clothes, my books, and most importantly, my art supplies. Jillian showed up an hour later with cardboard boxes and packing tape, her face a silent mask of fury. She didn't ask questions. She just started helping me dismantle my life. We created 2 piles, one to keep, one to leave behind. The pile of things to leave behind was much bigger. The photos of me and Dean, the stupid little gifts he'd given me, the bookshelf we'd built together, I left it all. I found a pen and a piece of paper. I thought about all the things I wanted to say to them, all the rage and pain I wanted to pour onto the page. But I knew it would be a waste of ink. They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't care. So, I wrote just 3 words. Watch me shine. I left the note on the kitchen counter. The next morning, before the sun came up, I loaded the last box into my car. With my entire life condensed into a few cardboard boxes, my art portfolio on the passenger seat, and a gaping hole where my heart used to be, I drove away from Philadelphia and didn't look back. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What they don't tell you is how much it hurts in the process. My arrival in Chicago felt less like a brave new beginning and more like a crash landing. The city was a sprawling, intimidating beast of steel and concrete, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. My first 2 weeks were spent in a grimy motel off the highway where the towels were paper thin and the man in the next room yelled at the television all night. I lived on coffee and granola bars, spending every waking hour on my laptop, applying for any job that didn't require a degree in finance or law. The rejections piled up in my inbox, each one a small confirmation of my mother's voice in my head. See? You can't make it on your own. Apartment hunting was even more demoralizing. I looked at dark, damp basement units that smelled of mildew, and tiny studios where the kitchen was a hot plate balanced on top of a mini fridge. I was running out of money, and I was running out of hope. Finally, I found a place I could just barely afford. It was a 3rd-floor walk-up in an old brick building in a neighborhood called Uptown. The floors creaked, the radiator hissed like an angry snake, and the view from my window was a brick wall. But it had good light for painting, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. My first night there was one of the loneliest of my life. I hadn't bought any furniture yet, so I inflated an air mattress and laid it in the middle of the empty living room. I sat on the floor, eating a sad-looking salad out of a plastic container, the silence of the apartment roaring in my ears. The sheer scale of what I had done suddenly hit me. I had no job, no friends, no safety net. I had walked away from my entire life. For a terrifying moment, I thought about calling my mother, about admitting defeat. Then I pictured her smug, satisfied face. I pictured Sylvia and Dean, probably curled up on the couch in his apartment, not giving me a second thought. And a different feeling rose up inside me, pure, unadulterated spite. It was a bitter, ugly feeling, but it was better than despair. It was fuel. I walked over to the bare refrigerator. I had bought a set of cheap, brightly colored magnets to try and make the place feel less bleak. I took one out, a bright yellow star, and stuck it on the fridge door. I looked at my pale, tired reflection in the glossy paint of the door. "Okay, Meredith," I whispered to my reflection. "This is it. No more feeling sorry for yourself. You have 1 month. 31 days until the next rent check is due. You find a job, or you pack this car up and admit they were right about you." The thought was so horrifying, it was like a jolt of electricity. Failure was not an option. I spent the rest of that night tailoring my resume, writing cover letters, and applying for every job I could find. The countdown had begun. The following weeks were a monotonous grind of rejection. I got a few interviews, but they always ended the same way. "You have an interesting background, but we're looking for someone with more experience." I took a temporary job stocking shelves at a grocery store just to make some cash. I'd come home late at night, my body aching, the smell of disinfectant clinging to my clothes, and feel the deadline creeping closer. With only 3 days left before rent was due, I had one last interview scheduled. It was for an administrative assistant position at Meridian Investment Group, a huge, faceless corporation downtown. I felt completely hopeless. I almost didn't go. What was the point? They'd take one look at my art degree and laugh me out of the building. But the thought of that rent check pushed me out the door. I put on my only interview outfit, a simple black dress and a blazer that suddenly felt too tight. I walked into a lobby that was bigger than my entire apartment building. Everything was gleaming marble and dark wood. I felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. I was sitting in a plush leather chair in the waiting area, my sweaty palms clutching my resume, when a woman with a severe haircut and a clipboard called my name. "Miss Miller?" She introduced herself as Carol from HR and led me to a small, windowless office. She glanced at my resume with a barely concealed look of disdain. The interview lasted less than 10 minutes. It was clear she had already dismissed me. As she was walking me out, her smile was tight and final. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Miller. We'll be in touch." We both knew they wouldn't. As I was walking towards the elevator, my shoulders slumped in defeat, a man burst out of a nearby office. He was talking on his phone, gesturing wildly. He had a chaotic energy about him. His tie was askew, his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it all day, and he had a coffee stain on his shirt. He nearly collided with me. "Whoa, sorry," he said, ending his call. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. He glanced at the visitor's badge clipped to my blazer. "You're here for the admin job?" I nodded, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I was. "It seems I'm not what they're looking for." He looked me up and down, not in a creepy way, but with a kind of intense scrutiny. "Carol get to you?" he asked. I must have looked confused. "The HR dragon," he clarified. "She thinks a resume is more important than a person." He stuck out his hand. "Preston Reynolds." "Meredith Miller," I said, shaking his hand. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared back into his office. He returned a moment later, followed by the HR dragon herself, who looked deeply annoyed. "Preston, this is highly unorthodox," she hissed. "My assistant just walked out with zero notice." "Carol," he shot back. "I'm drowning. I need a warm body." "You," he said, pointing at me. "Can you handle chaos? Are you smart? Can you learn fast?" It was the strangest job interview of my life. I was still reeling from the whiplash. Yes, I said, finding my voice. Yes to all three. He looked at Carol. She's hired. Then he looked at me. My office. Now. He turned and walked away, leaving me and a sputtering Carol in his wake. I followed him, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a wild, unfamiliar flicker of hope. His office was an explosion of paper. Stacks of files covered every surface. He swept a pile off a chair. Sit, he commanded. He picked up my resume from his desk. An art major, he said, raising an eyebrow. This is a long way from a gallery. I was tired of being judged for it. I was tired of being ashamed. Art teaches you to see what other people miss, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. It teaches you to find order in chaos and to create something beautiful out of a blank canvas. He stared at me for a long, silent moment. I thought he was going to laugh. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. I like that, he said. I like that a lot. Can you start Monday? My first day working for Preston Reynolds was like being strapped to the front of a speeding train. His mind moved 1,000,000 miles a minute, and he expected everyone around him to keep up. The world of finance was completely alien to me. People were yelling about bulls and bears, puts and calls. It was a language I didn't understand, and the learning curve was brutally steep. My official title was executive assistant, but my real job was to be the comm center of his professional hurricane. I organized the mountain of paperwork on his desk into a coherent filing system. I learned to anticipate his needs, having a fresh cup of coffee ready before he even knew he wanted one, and scheduling meetings he didn't realize he needed to have. I screened his calls, fending off persistent brokers and calming down anxious clients. He was a tough boss. He was impatient, demanding, and had zero tolerance for excuses. But he was also brilliant. I watched him navigate complex deals with an intuition that was almost artistic. And he was fair. He worked harder than anyone, and he noticed everything. If I stayed late to finish a project, he'd notice. If I caught a small error in a report that saved the company thousands of dollars, he'd notice. Our relationship was forged in the crucible of long hours and high-stakes deadlines. We were often the last two people in the office, the city lights twinkling outside the vast windows of the 40th floor. In those quiet, late-night hours, the professional boundaries began to soften. It started with food. He had a terrible habit of forgetting to eat. I started leaving a sandwich on his desk in the middle of the day. One night, around 9 p.m., our stomachs were rumbling in unison. I can't look at another spreadsheet, he declared, throwing his pen down. I'm ordering Thai food. You want some? We ate out of white cardboard boxes at his massive desk, the spicy scent of pad thai mingling with the smell of old paper. And for the first time, we talked about something other than work. He told me about growing up in the shadow of a domineering father who wanted him to take over the family construction business. He still thinks what I do is basically glorified gambling, Preston said with a wry smile. We haven't spoken in 2 years. Something in his story resonated with the hollow space in my own chest. My mother always preferred my sister, I found myself saying, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I was the artist. She was the lawyer. I was never enough. He didn't say, I'm sure that's not true, or offer any other useless platitudes. He just looked at me with a profound, quiet understanding. It sucks when the people who are supposed to be in your corner are actually in the opposite one, he said. That was it. That was the moment he stopped being just my boss and started being my friend. It was a fragile, tentative friendship, built in stolen moments over takeout containers and shared frustrations. He saw something in me that no one else had, not even me. He saw competence where I saw inadequacy. He saw strength where I saw brokenness. He started asking for my opinion on presentations. He'd hand me a complex report and say, "Read this. Tell me what I'm missing." He valued my perspective, the artist side that I had been taught to believe was a liability. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. About a year after I started working for him, Preston came into the office looking different. There was a restless energy about him, a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen before. That evening, he asked me to stay late. He closed his office door, which he never did, and spread a thick, professionally bound document out on his desk. "I'm done," he said. "I'm done making rich people richer. I'm done with the corporate games. I want to build something that actually matters." He slid the document towards me. It was a business plan for his own firm, Reynolds Capital Partners. Its mission was to invest in companies that were socially and environmentally responsible. It was bold, it was risky, and it was brilliant. "I've been working on this for years," he said, his voice low and intense. "And I'm officially giving my notice on Monday." My heart sank. I was so happy for him, but a selfish part of me was devastated. I was losing the best boss and the only friend I had in the city. "That's amazing, Preston," I said, trying to sound genuinely enthusiastic. "I'm not finished," he said, holding my gaze. "I want you to come with me. Not as my assistant. As my partner. I want you to be the COO of this company." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Preston, that's insane. I answer your phones and organize your files. I don't know the first thing about running a company." "You're wrong," he said, his voice unwavering. "For the past year, you've practically been running this department. You understand people, you understand systems, and you have an instinct for this business that is better than half the VPs on this floor. Most importantly, you have integrity. I can't do this without you, Meredith." I looked at the plan, then back at his face, at the fierce belief in his eyes. Belief in his vision. And belief in me. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life. All my life, people had been telling me what I couldn't do. For the first time, someone was showing me what I could. "Okay," I whispered, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Let's go build something." The next year was a whirlwind. We cashed in our savings, rented a tiny office that was little more than a closet, and worked 18-hour days. We were partners in every sense of the word. We argued over budgets, celebrated our first small client, and despaired when a major investor pulled out at the last minute. Through it all, our friendship deepened into something more profound. The line between professional and personal blurred until it disappeared completely. Late-night work sessions turned into long talks about our dreams. Business lunches felt more like dates. The unspoken tension between us grew until it was a tangible thing in our little office. One night, after we'd landed our first major deal, we were celebrating with cheap champagne in paper cups. He put his cup down and looked at me, his expression serious. "This isn't just about the business anymore, is it?" he asked softly. I shook my head, my heart pounding. "No," I whispered. "It's not." He stepped closer and gently kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, movie scene kiss. It was quiet and tender, and it felt like coming home. A year after that, we were sitting on the floor of our now slightly bigger office, surrounded by financial reports. It was after midnight. I was exhausted. Suddenly, he put down the folder he was reading. "Marry me, Meredith," he said, his voice completely serious. I stared at him. "What?" "Be my partner in everything," he said, taking my hands. "For the rest of our lives." Tears filled my eyes. Tears of joy, of disbelief, of a happiness so profound I never thought I would feel it again. He hadn't just healed my broken heart. He had helped me build a new one, a stronger one. We were married at the courthouse on a crisp autumn day. At our small reception dinner, he raised his glass. To my brilliant wife, he toasted, who taught me that the best investments are not in the market, but in people. The 5 years after our wedding were a testament to what two people can build when they are truly aligned. Reynolds Capital Partners grew beyond our wildest dreams. We moved from our closet-sized office to a full floor in a downtown high-rise. We hired a team of smart, passionate people who believed in our mission. We went from being a risky startup to a major player in the world of ethical investment. Preston was the face of the company, the charismatic visionary who could charm investors and inspire our team. I was the engine that made it all run. As COO, I built the systems, hired the right people, and managed the day-to-day operations that turned his big ideas into profitable realities. We were a perfect team. He was the artist, painting the broad strokes of our future, and I was the architect, designing the structure that would make it all stand. Our success brought with it a life I could never have imagined. We bought a beautiful brownstone with a small garden in the back where I finally had the space for a real art studio. We traveled. We built a wonderful circle of friends. But the greatest reward was the work itself, and the knowledge that we were doing it together. The pinnacle of our success came when a massive, multinational investment conglomerate, Sterling Ashworth, made an offer to acquire our firm. It was an astronomical sum of money, the kind that changes your life forever. But we were hesitant. We hadn't built our company just to sell it to the highest bidder. Their CEO, an old guard titan of Wall Street, flew to Chicago to meet with us personally. He told us he didn't want to absorb our company, he wanted to learn from it. He wanted to create a new, global division focused entirely on sustainable investment, and he wanted Preston to be its CEO. The most important part of the deal for me was his next condition. "And you, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, turning to me. "Your reputation as an operational wizard precedes you. This new division will only succeed with you as its chief operations officer. The deal is contingent on both of you staying on to lead it." They weren't just buying our company. They were buying our partnership. The night we signed the papers, Preston and I stood on the balcony of our home, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. We were no longer just a small, independent firm. We were at the helm of a global division of one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. "Can you believe it?" he whispered, wrapping his arms around me. "From a one-bedroom apartment to this." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "We did it," I said. "Together." We had built an empire, not on greed or ruthless ambition, but on integrity, partnership, and a shared dream. For years, my life in Philadelphia felt like a black and white movie I had watched a long time ago. The memories were faded, the emotions distant. I was a different person now, living in a full-color world of my own making. I had my husband, my career, my friends. I had everything I needed. Then, one Tuesday morning, the past came crashing back into my present. I was sitting at our sun-drenched breakfast nook, sipping my coffee and scrolling through the news on my tablet. Preston slid the print edition of the Wall Street Journal across the table to me. He had circled a small article in the business section. "You should read this," he said, his voice carefully neutral. The headline was small, but it hit me like a punch to the gut: Davis and Associates files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was Sylvia's law firm. The firm she had started with Dean after he'd left his job to join her. I read the article, my hands shaking slightly. It spoke of aggressive overexpansion, mismanagement of funds, and a mass exodus of clients. It mentioned that her partner, Dean Thompson, had left the firm 6 months prior and was now employed in the compliance department of Meridian Investment Group. The irony was staggering. The power couple my mother had engineered, the team of winners, had crashed and burned. "I didn't know you still kept up with Philadelphia legal news," I said, trying to sound casual as I folded the paper. "I don't," Preston replied, his eyes full of a gentle concern that I loved him for. "But you know we're in the final stages of our acquisition of Meridian." Their name came up in the due diligence paperwork. Dean Thompson. I made the connection. I didn't want you to be blindsided. I took a sip of my coffee, the warm ceramic a small comfort in my suddenly cold hands. The broken girl who had fled Philadelphia in shame was now part of the corporate entity that employed the man who had shattered her heart. Does this change anything about the acquisition? I asked, my voice all business. Preston reached across the table and covered my hand with his. This is a billion-dollar deal, Meredith. But you are priceless. If this is going to cause you pain, I will kill the whole thing right now. I don't care. His unwavering loyalty was my anchor. I smiled, a real smile. Don't be ridiculous, I said, squeezing his hand. Business is business. Let's buy the company. A few weeks later, after the deal was signed, Preston and I were planning our annual corporate gala. It was always a huge event, a way to thank our investors and celebrate our team. We should make this one the biggest yet, he said. A real celebration of the Sterling Ashworth merger and the Meridian acquisition. We'll fly in the entire Meridian leadership team. He paused, then looked at me. That would include Dean. And we should probably extend a +1 to all senior management. Which means, she might be there. A wicked, audacious idea began to form in my mind. A plan that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. You're right, I said, my voice dangerously calm. We should invite the whole team. And you know, as a gesture of goodwill, we should also invite representatives from their key former legal partners in Philadelphia. It's good corporate politics. Preston's eyes widened as he understood what I was proposing. Meredith, are you sure? I thought of the broken girl crying in a dingy motel room. I thought of my mother's cold, cruel words. And I thought of the powerful, successful woman I had become. Oh, I'm sure, I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Let's send them an invitation. A personal one. From me. The moment the invitations went out, a switch flipped inside me. The gala was no longer just a corporate event, it was a carefully planned stage production, and I was the director, producer, and star. For weeks, I was a woman possessed. I dove into the planning with a focus that bordered on obsession. The event coordinator, a perpetually flustered woman named Brenda, couldn't keep up with me. Meredith, I've never seen you this involved, she said one afternoon as I was grilling her about the exact shade of the floral centerpieces. Are you okay? I'm perfect, Brenda, I'd replied with a serene smile. I just want everything to be memorable. My most crucial preparation was for what I came to think of as my battle armor. I knew I needed a dress that would make a statement before I even opened my mouth. Jillian flew in from New York to lead the mission. We spent an entire weekend sweeping through Chicago's most exclusive boutiques. We need something that says, I own this room, and by the way, I also own the company your husband works for, Jillian declared as we sifted through racks of silk and satin. I tried on dozens of dresses. A classic black gown that was elegant but safe. A fiery red number that felt too loud, too desperate. I was starting to lose hope when Jillian pulled a dress from the back of a small, independent designer's shop. The moment I saw it, I knew. It was a floor-length gown made of the most exquisite emerald green silk. It was cut in a way that was both classic and modern, powerful and feminine. When I put it on, it felt like it had been made for me. I looked at myself in the three-way mirror. The woman staring back was not the timid, heartbroken girl who had fled Philadelphia. This was a woman who had fought, who had built, and who had won. That's the one, Jillian whispered, her eyes shining. That is the dress of a queen taking back her throne. The RSVPs trickled in. Mark would be attending. Sylvia would be his +1. And then, the one that made my breath catch in my throat, my mother, Lorraine, had accepted. Her handwritten note simply said, looking forward to reconnecting after all these years. The night before the gala, Preston found me in our walk-in closet, staring at the emerald gown hanging on the door. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "It's not too late to call it all off," he said softly. "We can feign food poisoning." I met his worried eyes in the reflection of the closet mirror. "Do you think I'm doing this for revenge?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I think you have every right to," he answered honestly. "But I also know your heart. So, I'll ask you, why are you doing this?" I thought for a long moment. "Because," I said finally, my voice gaining strength. "I need them to see me. Not the version of me they created in their heads to justify what they did. I need them to see who I really am. And maybe," I took a deep breath, "I need to see them for who they really are, too. Not as the monsters who haunt my past, but just as small, unhappy people." He kissed the top of my head. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, just remember one thing," he said. "You've already won." The Grand Hall of the Natural History Museum was a breathtaking sight. We had transformed the space. Uplighting cast dramatic shadows across the towering dinosaur skeletons, making them look both ancient and strangely futuristic. A string quartet was playing softly from a balcony, their music weaving through the elegant chatter of the city's most influential people. Everything was perfect. Everything was a testament to the world Preston and I had built. We stood near the entrance, a receiving line of two, greeting our guests. I wore the emerald gown, my only jewelry, a simple diamond necklace Preston had given me for our 5th anniversary. I felt a strange and profound sense of calm. All the anxiety of the past few weeks had melted away, replaced by a cool, clear certainty. This was my home turf. I saw them the moment they walked in. It was like a scene in a movie where the sound suddenly drops out. My mother entered first, her posture ramrod straight, scanning the room with a critical eye. Sylvia and Dean followed a step behind her, looking wide-eyed and completely out of their depth. They were dressed nicely enough, but they wore their clothes like costumes. They were tourists in a land where I was a citizen. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I just stood there, smiling and talking to a senator about green energy initiatives, and I waited. Let them come to me. They circulated awkwardly around the perimeter of the room before they finally saw us. I watched the sequence of expressions on their faces. My mother's polite social smile froze, then cracked, before being hastily reassembled. Sylvia's eyes widened in genuine, unadulterated shock. And Dean. Dean's face went completely pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. My mother recovered first, as she always did. She swept towards me, her arms outstretched for a hug that was pure theater. "Meredith, darling," she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You look absolutely breathtaking. What a magnificent party." She air-kissed the space beside my cheek. "Mother," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm so glad you could make it." I gestured to my husband. "This is Preston." Sylvia, ever the networker, recovered next. She extended a hand to Preston. "Preston Reynolds. It's an honor. Your reputation certainly precedes you. I've been following your company's success for years." Preston took her hand, his smile polite but firm. He put his other hand on the small of my back, a small, proprietary gesture that did not go unnoticed. "It's kind of you to say so," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "But I can't take all the credit. This incredible woman right here is the true genius. I just have the ideas. Meredith is the one who builds the empire." The shock on their faces was subtle, but I saw it. This was not the narrative they had expected. Dean finally managed to step forward, looking like he was walking to his own execution. He stiffly extended a hand to Preston. "Dean Thompson, Compliance Officer at Meridian." "Ah, yes," Preston said, his tone perfectly professional, though I could see the glint in his eye. "We're so glad to have the Meridian team on board. Welcome to the family." It was the final click of the lock. I watched the full understanding of the situation dawn on Dean's face, followed quickly by a wave of horrified humiliation. The woman he had thrown away for being a dreamer with no ambition was now the co-owner of the company that signed his paychecks. The power dynamic had been so thoroughly and completely upended, it was almost poetic. My mother's face was a mask of confusion. The world she understood, the one where lawyers were winners and artists were losers, had just been turned upside down. If you're still listening, please do me a favor and like this video and comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you're here with me on this journey, and your support truly means the world to me. It gives me the courage to keep going. Just type the number 1 so I know you're out there. And now, let me tell you what happened next. Later in the evening, after Preston's welcome speech where he officially and very publicly welcomed the Meridian team into our corporate family, my mother cornered me by the champagne fountain. Her composure was back, but her eyes were sharp with a familiar, calculating light. "I always knew you had this in you, Meredith," she said, rewriting history with a single sentence. "You were always so driven. You just needed a little push in the right direction." I took a slow sip of my water and looked at her. The old me would have been desperate for that crumb of approval. The new me just felt a profound sense of clarity. What I needed was a mother who believed in me, not one who tried to trade me in for a better model, I said. My voice was quiet, but the words were sharp. Her smile tightened at the edges. She quickly changed the subject. "This Preston seems like a wonderful man," she said. "He clearly adores you." Then, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping. "You know, Sylvia and Dean are going through a dreadful time. Her law firm, the divorce, it's all been a terrible mess. Dean's salary at Meridian is barely enough to cover his alimony. As family, perhaps you and Preston could see to it that he's well taken care of? A promotion, perhaps?" And there it was. The real agenda. It was never about reconnecting. It was about leveraging my success for their benefit. It was about power. "His professional performance will determine his career trajectory," I said, my voice as crisp and cold as the ice in the champagne bucket. "Our company is a meritocracy, Mother. He will get exactly what he earns. Just like I did." I left her there, speechless for once in her life. A little while later, Sylvia found me. She looked tired. The ambitious fire in her eyes had been replaced by a brittle, weary hardness. "That was quite a speech your husband gave," she said. There was no compliment in it, only a grudging acknowledgement of power. "You've done very well for yourself." It was the same backhanded compliment she'd used for years, implying my success was merely a reflection of the man I'd married. "Let me be clear, Sylvia," I said, turning to face her fully. "We have done well for ourselves. Together. Preston and I are partners. We build each other up, we don't use each other as stepping stones. That's the difference between a partnership and an acquisition. You should think about that." A flash of raw hurt crossed her face before she could hide it. I saw, in that unguarded moment, the full scope of her unhappiness. She had won the battle she had started all those years ago, but she had lost the war. She had gotten the man she wanted, only to discover he wasn't the prize she'd imagined. He was just a man. And she was just a woman who had built her life on a foundation of someone else's pain, and was now living in the ruins. I felt no triumph. Only a deep, hollow sadness for the relationship we could have had, and for the person she had chosen to become. When the last guest had finally departed and the museum had fallen silent, Preston and I rode home in a comfortable quiet. The adrenaline of the evening had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. Back at our house, I slipped out of the emerald gown and into my favorite soft pajamas. We met in the kitchen, as we so often did at the end of a long day. He was making us tea. "So," he said, handing me a warm mug. "Was it everything you wanted it to be?" I thought about the shock on their faces, the satisfying sting of my final words to my mother and sister. But that wasn't what I was left with. It was more, I said, wrapping my hands around the mug. I went into tonight thinking I wanted revenge. I thought I wanted to make them feel as small and worthless as they made me feel. I looked up at him. But that's not what happened. What happened? He asked softly. When I looked at them, I said, the realization dawning on me even as I spoke the words, I didn't see monsters. I didn't even see villains. I just saw three deeply unhappy people. My mother, who is so obsessed with the appearance of success that she can't see the value in anything else. My sister, who is so desperate to win that she destroyed her own integrity. And Dean, who is just weak and let himself be swayed by the promise of an easier life. I took a sip of tea. Standing there, in that room, surrounded by the life we built. I didn't feel anger towards them anymore. I felt grateful. Preston looked at me, a slow, beautiful smile spreading across his face. I'm grateful for them, I continued, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. Because if they hadn't been so cruel, if they hadn't betrayed me so completely, I never would have found the courage to leave. I would have stayed there, in that little life, always trying to earn their approval. Their betrayal didn't break me. It liberated me. It was the push I needed to find my own strength, to find this city, and to find you. He set his mug down and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, the scent of home, of safety, of a love built on a foundation of solid rock. That, Meredith Reynolds, he whispered into my hair, is the greatest victory of all. Not in showing them what they lost, but in fully understanding everything you've gained. And he was right. The night hadn't been about them at all. It had been about me. It was the final, quiet act of closing a door to the past, not with a slam, but with a gentle click. They were no longer a part of my story. They were just the prologue. My real life, the beautiful, vibrant, technicolor life I had built for myself, was just beginning. Thank you for letting me share this with you. It's not always easy to revisit these parts of our lives, but it's important. If my story resonated with you in any way, if you've ever had to rebuild from scratch, I would be honored if you'd share a little piece of your own journey in the comments. We are all stronger together. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so we can continue to share our stories with each other.